I never saw it coming. One minute, we were a family, and the next she was gone, chasing a man she met at the library. She tore our lives apart, leaving me with nothing but a broken heart and a daughter to protect. But I didn't just sit back and let her walk away. I planned my revenge, cold and calculated. I took everything she thought she'd gain, including our daughter's love. Now she watches from the sidelines as I rebuild what she destroyed. This is my story, my vengeance, and it's far from over. Oh, wow! That was a day I'll never forget. It seemed like just a regular Saturday dinner. Young Rachel was there, staying with us for the weekend, as usual. Let me tell you about Rachel being there. Rachel's mom, Dora, was a widow who worked long hours at a taxi company almost every weekend. Rachel and my daughter Otterly had become best friends at school, so it became normal for them to have sleepovers. Soon Rachel was staying over at our house on Friday and Saturday nights, while her mom worked night shifts and rested during the day. Marge, my ex-wife and Otterly's mom, got to know Dora pretty well. But to be honest, I had never met her. There wasn't a real reason for that. Maybe Marge thought Dora was too lovely for me to meet. It just turned out that way. At that time, I was traveling a lot for work. The company was new, and we were trying hard to find our place in a market that was already taken by others. Marge would take care of dropping off and picking up Rachel, while we sometimes had taxis come to collect her on Sundays. Rachel loved when the taxi drivers came with sweets and ice creams. Even Otterly enjoyed it because she often got treats too. Anyway, back to that unforgettable Saturday dinner. There we were, the four of us at the table enjoying our meal. Marge had just served dessert, and I had just returned after putting away the main dishes. Suddenly, without any warning, Marge said, "Pete, I want a divorce. I'm leaving you." She said it so casually as if it was just another part of our meal. "Sorry," was all I managed to say. When your wife of 10 years says something like that out of the blue, you first wonder if you heard her right. "I want a divorce. I found someone else and want to be with him," she told me. I was at a loss for words, unsure how to respond to something so unexpected. I remembered that there were two young girls, one of whom was our daughter, sitting at the table with us, watching my every move and listening to my words. I think I handled the situation very well that day. Looking back, I am proud of how calm I stayed. For a long time, I replayed Marge's words in my mind until I truly believed that she was telling me she wanted me out of her life. I probably said something silly like, "If that's how you feel, I'll start looking for a new place tomorrow." At least, I think that's what I said. I was in shock, so my memory of that day might be a little unclear. But I did mention moving out, and then Marge hit me with a surprising response. "No, you'll need to keep the house. I won't need it, and you'll need it for Otterly." I stopped pretending to eat my melting ice cream and stared at Marge. "We're going on a trip around the world, and Otterly can't miss out on her school at her age," she said casually, not even glancing up. "You've got to be joking," I replied, louder than I meant to. I was trying to control my emotions, not for Marge's sake, but for those two young girls at the table. Marge probably decided to say this during dinner, knowing I would keep my cool around the children. "I want to see the world while I'm still young enough to enjoy it," Marjorie said, not recognizing the irony in her words. At that moment, I was at a loss for words, and if things weren't so serious, I might have laughed out loud. When Marge and I first got together, I was very excited about traveling. I'd always planned to travel the world for a few years after finishing my engineering training before settling down. When Marge came into my life, I thought that plan would stay the same. I imagined us backpacking together in beautiful places. But Marge had a slightly different idea. She also wanted to see the world, visiting places like the Grand Canyon, the Rocky Mountains, and those big redwood trees. We talked about Ayers Rock in Australia and the North Island of New Zealand, with its bubbling mud pools. A friend from New Zealand had told me about his skiing adventures on the South Island, which sounded exciting. More exotic than the Alps, anyway. But Marge's plan was a bit different from mine. I thought we would get married and set off on our travels once I finished my studies, with the savings we had managed to put away. I had imagined that after a few years of traveling, we would come back to the UK, settle down, and have some kids. Of course, that was assuming we didn't find a place we liked better while we were away. Marge wanted to have kids first. She had said, "While I'm young enough to enjoy them." At the time, I thought I understood her reasons. Her parents were older when her mother had her, and I could see that it had affected her. Marge figured that once the kids were grown, we would travel the world together. But it seemed like she changed her mind. Taking care of Otterly might not have been as fun as she expected. I knew she didn't enjoy her pregnancy or the birth. After Otterly was born, the idea of having 3 children quickly vanished from her plans without much discussion, as far as I could tell. That was the moment I almost lost it. But I couldn't laugh about it. Looking back now, maybe I should have. I couldn't stay at the table listening to Marge any longer. I felt like I would do something I'd regret later. So I got up and went out to the garden. For some reason, maybe just out of habit, I began trimming the dead flowers from my roses. I don't know how long I was out there before I realized I had company. I first noticed Rachel next to me, trimming the bush beside mine. Then I saw Otterly working on the other side. Neither of them said a word when they came over. "Be careful of the thorns, girls. You don't have your gardening gloves on," I warned without thinking. "We'll be careful, Daddy," Otterly replied. "What's your mother doing?" I asked, almost forgetting why I was angry. It felt like a question I had to ask. "I think she's upstairs packing," Otterly said quietly, as if this was just normal. Suddenly, I felt a wave of anger again, and I couldn't focus on the roses anymore. I was afraid I would pull too many flowers off if I kept going. I stepped back and watched the girls continue their work. Honestly, I wanted to go upstairs and confront Marge. I was not just upset about her decision to leave me without warning. I was more hurt by the fact that she had told our daughter she didn't want Otterly to go with her. I couldn't understand how any mother, especially my wife, could act like this towards her child. "I'm sorry, Otterly," I found myself saying without giving any explanation. "Why, Daddy? You're not going to leave us too, like Mummy?" my daughter replied, clearly picking up on my worry. "Most of the kids at school have daddies who are gone. I'd rather have a daddy who loves me than a mother who—" Otterly didn't finish her thought, and I still wonder what she meant. Did Marjorie somehow make Otterly feel unloved? I hadn't noticed anything like that. To me, Marge was always a caring mother to both Otterly and Rachel when she visited. But if I missed the signs that my wife was seeing someone else, I worried about what else went unnoticed. Maybe Otterly believed that Marjorie didn't love her just because she wasn't taking her along. I suddenly saw the 2 girls working together on a rose bush, holding hands. One was pulling off the dead flowers, while the other put them in a basket. Then I heard Marjorie talking on the phone in the bedroom. The windows were open because it was warm outside. I couldn't catch what she was saying, but I realized the girls might hear her better than I could. "Ice cream!" I called out. "Come on, girls! Let's go get the biggest ice creams we can find." I knew they had just eaten ice cream for dessert, while mine had melted as I pushed it around my bowl. But it felt like the best idea I could come up with in that moment. Both girls cheered and quickly forgot about the roses, giving each other high fives, something I hadn't seen them do before. I walked to the car with an 8-year-old on each side, each holding my hand. To make it special, I didn't take them to a fast food place. We didn't have a real ice cream shop nearby. Instead, I chose a nice restaurant in town and ordered their amazing sundae. I thought they might not finish it, but I was very wrong. It took them a while to eat, which gave me some time to process Marjorie's surprising news and try to understand what was happening to us. I needed to think about what this situation meant for me now and in the future. For some reason, I didn't feel too upset that Marjorie was leaving. Sure, I would miss her, but any feelings I had for her vanished when she made her announcement in front of Otterly. There was a big issue that her leaving would cause me: childcare. I could take care of Otterly, but I needed someone to take her to and from school every day. I knew my job would try to help, but our hours were from 9 to 5, while school was from 9 to 3. Plus, who would look after Otterly during school breaks? Rachel? I felt bad for her, but I had my own challenges, and her mother needed to figure things out on her own. I thought I should call her later to explain everything. The only idea I had was my sister Carol. She lived quite far away, but perhaps she could pick up Otterly from school in the afternoons, even if it meant a long drive. The only issue was that Carol's kids might finish school around the same time as Otterly. I pulled out my phone and called Carol, hoping she might have a solution. Carol was always good at coming up with ideas. She did what? Carol raised her voice as I briefly explained Marjorie's news without sharing too many details since the girls were with me. I realized I hadn't learned much about Marjorie's situation. I didn't know how long it had been happening or with whom. Carol, I said that Marge left us for someone. Who? Someone special? Carol pressed. I have no idea, just some guy she met, I guess. I didn't ask. His name is Ronald, Otterly piped up, surprising me. He's a customer at the library, Rachel chimed in, eager to share. It turned out Marjorie had been doing some part-time work at the library to earn a little extra money and have a break, or so she said. I looked at the two girls, who were happily enjoying their big ice cream sundaes, while I repeated what they had said to Carol. But my problem is, Carol, I don't know how I'm going to pick up Otterly from school every day. I can drop her off in the mornings and get into the office a little late, but there's no way I can leave early every day. That's okay, Daddy, Otterly reassured me. Rachel's mom will pick me up from school, Otterly said confidently. Before Carol could reply, I tried to explain. It wouldn't be fair to ask her to do that every day, Otterly. Oh, it won't be a problem, Otterly assured me. We've already figured it out. Right, Rachel? Rachel looked up from her ice cream, nodded, and smiled at me, letting me know that the two of them had been planning this together quietly. I couldn't understand when they found the time to do that. Rachel will stay over at our house on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, Otterly said. And I'll stay with Rachel and her mom on the other school nights. You can drop us off on Mondays, and Rachel's mom will pick us up in the afternoon. Otterly had that satisfied look that kids get when they solve a problem easily. I wasn't sure how to respond. I was a bit surprised by everything I had just heard. Carol must have caught Otterly's idea because she said, "That sounds like a great plan to me, Pete. Have you talked to her?" Well, no, Carol, I didn't think about it. I've never met Rachel's mom, so I'm not sure if she would agree. It's asking a lot. The taxi driver has been asking my mom to work on Sunday nights for a while, Rachel added. She said she would earn more money at the taxi company than at the shop, but she didn't want to ask Otterly's mom to watch me. I gathered from Rachel's words that her mom must have been working part-time at a store during the week. It seemed like she was working hard all the time. It sounds like the kids have found a solution, Carol commented. What is Otterly's friend's mom like? I have no idea. I've never met her, I admitted, making sure to watch what I said, knowing the two girls were listening intently. You should probably go and talk to Rachel's mom soon and see what she thinks about their idea, Carol suggested. Then turning back to the other topic, she asked, Has Marjorie already moved out? I don't know, Carol. The girls and I are at a restaurant in town. I took them out for some ice cream before heading back, but I think she was packing when we left. I think you should pick up some new locks while you're out. You don't want her coming back. Call me later if you need help tonight, or Frank and I can come over if you'd like. Andorra looked lovely, her simple but elegant makeup enhancing her features. Her hair was perfectly in place. She could easily be mistaken for a model on a runway, moving with grace. I understood why all the drivers had taken an interest in her and why they lingered around the taxi office. Andorra, there's a man here who wants to speak to you, said the man at the counter. Hi, Pete, is everything okay? She asked with a cheerful smile, though her tone had a touch of concern. Well, sort of, I responded, feeling anxious as I glanced around at the men who seemed to be pretending not to listen. Rachel is fine, and there's nothing to worry about. I just thought you should know what's happening. Can we talk somewhere private? As soon as I asked, all the men stood up as if they were going outside to leave us alone. But Andorra told them to stay put and that we would step outside. What's wrong, Peter? You look a bit troubled, she said once the door closed behind us. Then she noticed some girls with their faces pressed against the car window and waved to them. The thing is, Andorra, Marjorie has left me, I blurted out. It felt odd talking to someone I had just met and calling her by name. I was surprised she recognized me since I thought we had never met before. Oh no, you poor thing, was her first response. Then she seemed to grasp the situation. Does this mean we have a child care issue tonight? No, Andorra, I said, still getting used to the name. I just thought you should know that I'll be looking after the children by myself tonight. I thought it was right to inform you since we hardly know each other. That's not entirely true, Peter. Rachel talks about you all the time. She thinks of you as a substitute father. She even has a picture of you next to one of my husband's by her bed." "Really? Where did she get that?" I asked, surprised. "I believe Otterly gave it to her. Anyway, do you want me to take the girls tonight? I can make arrangements if you want some time alone." "Oh, no, that's not necessary. I just wanted to keep you informed. I'd be in a tough spot if they hadn't been with me this afternoon. I'm okay looking after Rachel. I just thought you should be aware." "I'm sure Rachel is in great hands with you, Peter," she said, reaching out to take my hand to reassure me. "I'll pick up Rachel in the morning. You should get some rest. 5 o'clock as usual is perfect. But maybe you could come by yourself because we really need to talk about the future. If you want, I can bring Rachel home." "Oh, yes, the future. I wasn't thinking," Andorra replied, looking even more worried. She must have realized what Marjorie leaving me could mean. "Don't worry. I think together we can come up with a plan. The girls already have a lot of ideas," I said, trying to smile. Andorra seemed a bit relieved. "Okay, but I'll go get Rachel. I'm sure you have plenty to focus on." "Thanks, I do. If I can just wrap my head around everything. I'll see you tomorrow evening. And please don't worry about Rachel. She's a great young lady." "Aren't they both?" Andorra said as we walked to the car. She shared a few words with the girls, said goodnight, and reminded them to behave. When we got home, there was another car parked in my driveway. Marjorie climbed out and came over as I stopped the car. "Where have you been? I've been waiting here for ages," she said sharply. Then she told us she was leaving. Even after what she'd told me earlier, I didn't recognize this person as the woman I had been married to for so long. "If that's who I think it is, you should tell him to move his car before I do it myself," I shot back. I felt really annoyed that Marjorie had him there when we returned. It felt like she was flaunting it. Looking back, I think I kept my emotions in check that day, mainly because the kids were present. But it seemed like Marjorie was trying to get a reaction from me. Maybe she thought it would help her justify what she was doing. Marjorie waved her arm, and the car roared to life, pulling out of the driveway and parking across the street. Ignoring her complaints, I shifted my car back into gear and maneuvered to reverse into the space where her car had been. She yelled that I almost hit her as I got out. "Oh, you're still here. I thought you had left," I said, walking towards the front door. Then I stopped and turned to look at her. "Aren't you taking that?" I asked, pointing at her usual car, which was empty, while the other one was full of her things. "No point. You might as well sell it. We're leaving the country on Wednesday," she replied. "Where to?" "Where should I have my lawyer send the divorce papers?" I asked loudly, but Marge was already ahead of me. "The address of Ronnie's lawyer is on the kitchen table. He'll know how to reach us," she said quickly. Then she turned to talk to Otterly, who, along with Rachel, had also gotten out of the car by that time. I didn't stay to listen to their conversation, and my daughter and I have never mentioned it since. It couldn't have been much, because both girls came inside with me just moments later and shut the door firmly. What I didn't see, but heard somewhere in my mind, was the loud slap of their hands as they cheered each other. At that moment, I didn't think much of the sound. We all settled on the couch to watch TV for a while until I decided it was time for the girls to go to bed. They both gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before heading upstairs without a fuss, which was a first for Otterly, as I remembered. I'm not sure what time I finally went to sleep, but I did have a couple of drinks to help me unwind that night. I woke up Sunday morning to the usual smell of bacon cooking in the house. For a brief moment, I forgot that Marjorie was gone and wondered why she was up so early on a Sunday. Then all the memories from the day before came rushing back, and I looked around the room. Something felt off or different, but for a moment, I couldn't figure out what it was. Then I noticed that when I'd gone to bed, there had been signs that Marjorie was there, drawers slightly open and wardrobe doors not quite closed. Now, everything was shut, and there were no signs of Marjorie anywhere. Even the pictures of her parents that I remembered on the dresser were gone. I got out of bed and went to the bathroom for my usual morning routine, only to find that Marjorie's things were also missing from there. I realized I must have had some visitors while I slept, and I could only think of 2 possible people who could have done this. "Come on, Daddy, breakfast is getting cold," I heard Otterly call from the stairs as I stepped out of my room. In the kitchen, I saw both 8-year-olds waiting for me. They insisted I sit down while they served me. I enjoyed a hearty breakfast with fresh orange juice and coffee, presented like I was dining in a fancy hotel. The two girls had chosen cornflakes, orange juice, and tea for breakfast. I shared some cheerful words about how nice the breakfast was and how skilled the cooks were, which made both girls smile widely. Just as we were finishing our meal, Carol, her husband Frank, and their kids arrived. Their entrance brought a slight change to the peaceful atmosphere. It seemed like they had expected Carol and Frank because Otterly and Rachel quickly offered them mugs of coffee. I had to gently persuade the girls to let me handle the cleaning up while they went outside to play with Carol's children. Actually, it was Carol who ended up doing the washing up while Frank and I enjoyed more coffee, and I shared the story of the day before. My sister and her husband said they would help out in any way they could. Frank even provided the name of a lawyer who had helped his sister with her divorce, and she turned out to be a great choice. Carol prepared dinner for everyone using what she found in the freezer and fridge. I spent most of the day tending to my roses whenever I wasn't chatting with Carol and Frank. One thing I remember from that day is that during the afternoon, Rachel and Otterly helped me take care of my roses, and Rachel mentioned a line from a song, "It's been a good year for the roses." I doubt she understood how the song related to the feelings from the day before, but I certainly did. I'm not sure how I reacted when Rachel said that. Still, I know she has brought it up often over the years. The girls seem to enjoy the song, and we often hear them playing or singing it, especially when someone mentions Marjorie. Around 4:30, a taxi pulled up, and Andorra got out. The girls welcomed her inside, and we made introductions. Then Carol, Andorra, and I moved to the lounge while Frank took all the children out to the garden to keep them busy. Andorra sympathized with me about what had happened. But before I could say much, Carol told Andorra about the girls' plan for looking after the kids. Andorra mentioned that she had casually talked to Rachel about working the Sunday night shift for the cab company. She told us she could earn more money this way than from working 4 mornings at her job in the local shop. Without much discussion, we decided to go along with the plan the children had shared with me the night before. There was some talk about Carol helping take care of both girls a couple of days a week during the school holidays. Andorra called the taxi company boss to check if she could take on an extra shift. He seemed really happy about it and asked her to start that night. For some reason, she looked to me for approval, and I just smiled and nodded, so she agreed. It was a bit tricky because Rachel needed her school clothes for the next day. So Carol drove Andorra and Rachel home to get them, and Otterly insisted on tagging along. As I carried Rachel's bag into the house from Carol and Frank's car, a thought popped into my head. "Andorra, do you drive?" I asked. "Yes, but I haven't been able to afford a car since Tony left," she replied. "How would you feel about a little Micra to use?" I found myself asking. Andorra stopped and looked at Marjorie's car parked in the driveway. "I couldn't," she said. "Why not? She doesn't want it anymore and asked me to get rid of it. You could definitely use it since you're taking Otterly to school every day." "Are you sure?" she asked. "Come on," I insisted. "Let's call the insurance company and get you added as a driver. We can take Marjorie off the policy since Ronald can handle her insurance from now on." "His name's Ronald, Daddy," Otterly corrected me. "Who cares what his name is? He's Roland the Rat to me," I replied a bit too sharply. "He can't be, Daddy. Roland the Rat is funny and nice," she said. I couldn't really argue with her logic, so I adjusted my words. "Okay, if you insist, it's Ronald the Rat," I grinned at her. For those who might not know, Roland the Rat was a puppet character on a popular morning TV show. In the weeks that followed, we all got used to the new routine. Carol, often with Frank and the kids, would usually show up on Saturday mornings to check on what we needed in the pantry and suggest what to buy. Most of the time, she'd also cook lunch for us unless we went out to eat. And yes, Carol never really wore white gloves, but she would inspect everything while she was at the house. Housework wasn't my best skill, but I quickly found I had little else to do in the evenings without Otterly there. I usually did little things around the house often enough that it looked good most of the time. Carol never seemed to find much wrong anyway. I found weeknights to be lonely at first, but I got used to it after a while. Fridays were wonderful, though, when I came home from work and found Andorra and the girls there. Andorra quickly took to preparing dinner for us before she went to start her Friday evening job. The harder times were during the weekdays, especially when I returned home from work to an empty house and woke up alone in the morning. No matter how I felt about Marjorie for her decisions, waking up alone in bed every day after so many years of marriage was challenging. It just took time to adjust. The divorce became a bit tricky. Marjorie and her new partner had left the country and were traveling a lot. I learned that Marjorie's lawyer was having a tough time reaching her, and it seemed like her partner was making things harder on purpose. Eventually, I found out that her partner had a very upset wife looking for child support. I met her once when our lawyers got together to discuss things. To be honest, I had my own problems to focus on and didn't want to get involved in hers. I know she eventually managed to freeze all of his UK bank accounts and got his British assets in the end. Without getting involved too much, I did what I could by telling her lawyer where Marjorie was when she called home to speak to our daughter. The credit for that should really go to Otterly, though. She had a knack for getting Marjorie to share her location when she called. Then she would tell me the news right away. I'm not sure if Otterly knew why I wanted the information or not. Strangely, the trouble Marjorie's lawyer had getting in touch with her worked in my favor. After another court meeting where Marjorie's lawyer asked the judge for more time because he hadn't heard back from her, the judge got frustrated. He wanted to know where Marjorie was, and the poor lawyer had to admit he had no idea. The judge turned to me and asked if I knew where she was. "I'm sorry, sir," I said as I stood, "but I have not spoken to my wife since she chose to leave our daughter and me." I tried to point out her absence, and technically, since we hadn't talked in person since she left, I was telling the truth. I may have forgotten to mention that Marjorie called Otterly every 3 weeks or so. But that wasn't what the judge asked, was it? You know how some people really like to push others for answers without any extra details. I wasn't sure what was going on, but maybe the judge had a tough day. Perhaps he was dealing with a challenging case, and it made him a bit short-tempered. Suddenly, I heard him say something about unreasonable behavior as a reason for ending a marriage. He explained briefly that Marjorie had not been in touch with her lawyer, which could be seen as a problem. Then he mentioned that I might also have a reason to seek a divorce based on Marjorie being absent from our lives. But in any case, he was ready to grant my divorce right away and give me full custody of our child, Otterly. The judge made a point, saying that shared custody wouldn't be fair if Marjorie couldn't even communicate well with her own lawyer. He looked at me directly and said, "Mr. Thomas, you will have full and exclusive custody of Otterly starting today. I'm also cutting off any claims Marjorie has on parenting rights, but with one condition." Turning back to Marjorie's lawyer, he continued, "If Marjorie comes to see me in the next 21 days, I might think about changing my mind. Can you make sure to let her know?" Marjorie's lawyer nodded timidly, saying he would try to inform her. The judge raised his eyebrows as he turned back to me. "Well, Mr. Thomas, I don't expect that will happen, and even if it did, I probably wouldn't change my decision. I'm surprised you haven't asked for any support payments for Otterly from your wife," he said. "I don't think I'd have much luck getting it, Your Honor, unless Marjorie comes back," I replied. The judge leaned forward and whispered to his clerk before shuffling through some papers on his desk. "We will set a temporary order for £100 a month. This amount is just for record-keeping. Like you, I doubt you will see that money. However, if Marjorie returns to this court's area, we can adjust the amount later. You should check to see if Marjorie has any property or money left in the UK." That was it. I left the courtroom feeling a sense of relief, keeping all the shared belongings from our marriage and the potential for more if we could figure it out. I never gave it much thought. Looking at my call log at home the next Monday, I saw that there had been an international call the day before. I must have missed it while I was outside working in the yard. The call had to be from Marjorie. She was the only person who called me from abroad. What puzzled me was that neither Otterly nor Rachel had mentioned the call to me, nor had they shared Marjorie's whereabouts as they usually did. You can think what you want about their silence, but I have my thoughts. Since Otterly hadn't been in court that week, I tried not to bring up the divorce with her, but I was curious about how the girls knew the time frame involved. I doubted the social worker assigned to help Otterly would have shared any details. As time went on, Marjorie's calls to Otterly became less frequent. I wasn't surprised. From the few calls I overheard, it seemed like the conversations were mostly one-sided. My daughter occasionally asked about Marjorie's whereabouts, but those questions stopped once her boyfriend's situation had resolved. I have no idea how Otterly or Rachel found out about his situation. I figured that since they lived nearby, his children probably went to the same school as my girls. Maybe all the kids shared information together. But if they did, the girls never talked about it with me. I guess the same could explain how the girls learned about Marjorie's announcement when she moved out. Sometimes adults underestimate how much kids understand about what's happening around them. I can't remember exactly, but it seemed like the divorce had been official for about 4 months. One Saturday afternoon, I took Otterly and Rachel to the movies. We were enjoying hamburgers at the local fast food place when Rachel told me that she and her mom would be moving soon. I asked why, and Rachel explained that their lease was about to end, and her mom thought the landlord was going to raise the rent too much. At the time, I didn't see what was really happening or realize that there was another plan in motion. After all, they were just 2 9-year-old girls. It was expected that they would try to get a treat or two out of me, or maybe even a fun day out. The idea that they had to come up with a clever way to invite Andorra and Rachel to move in with us was something I had never thought about before. They set it up on Friday evening while we were all having dinner. Andorra had made a nice meal before leaving for her shift at the office. Otterly, without a hint of mischief, asked Andorra if she had found a good place to live yet. Before Andorra could respond, Rachel started sharing stories about the flats they had looked at. Andorra tried to say those places weren't as bad as Rachel described. Somehow, I didn't realize that if Rachel had seen those flats, then Otterly had too, since the 2 girls were always together when one of us, either Andorra or I, was looking after them. Then Otterly made a comment that I should have seen coming from a mile away. "Dad, we have a spare guest room upstairs," Otterly pointed out. "Why don't Rachel and Aunt Andorra move in here with us? Rachel already sleeps in my room sometimes, and it would save us from moving around a lot." I thought about it and realized Otterly's idea wasn't bad at all. It would mean less travel for Andorra, and she wouldn't have to pay rent for her flat anymore. I looked at Andorra, hoping for some guidance, but she didn't meet my gaze. I felt awkward. If I turned down the suggestion right away, Andorra might get upset. But if I asked her directly, I could make her uncomfortable. I decided to take a safer route and be a bit vague. "Well, sweetheart, you know, sometimes it can be tricky when a man and woman who aren't married live together. Some people might misunderstand," I said hesitantly. To my surprise, Andorra laughed. "Come on, Pete, you sound so old-fashioned." "I'm not, Andorra. I was just thinking about how people might see us." "My reputation? You're joking. Want to know why we're leaving our flat? It's because I go out every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, and now, instead of being driven home by a taxi, I'm driving around in a new car. I don't get it. The Nissan isn't new. It seems new compared to some of my neighbors' cars. They think I can only afford it because of my weekend activities." Andorra waited for me to understand, a playful look on her face. "You're serious?" I exclaimed. "Yep, they even wrote to my landlord. I've told everyone that I work for the taxi company. I've even talked to some of them when they've called for a ride, but the rumors just keep going." "Oh my gosh, the sooner you move out of there, the better," my friend said. "I agree, but finding a good place I can afford isn't as easy as it seems," I replied. "Well, what about Otterly's idea? There's plenty of space here." "Are you sure? You didn't sound too excited about it." "Yes, I am sure. This house feels empty without the girls around, and besides, you're not as bad a cook as I am." Should I take that as a compliment? Considering my cooking, yes. The room is available if you want it, Andorra, and I can see the kids can't wait. I pointed at the 2 smiling faces of the children. "We'll have to talk about rent," Andorra said. "No, I don't think we will. I'm not a fan of cleaning up, and I've already said you cook better than I do. How about you help out here as a cook and take care of the house?" "I'd do that anyway, but I should pay something. At least for heating, electricity, and taxes," Andorra insisted. "Let's worry about that later. Right now, I need to know if you really want to move in here. If you're inviting us, then yes, we'd love to." "Great. So it's settled. When do you want to move in? Oh, by the way, this place is furnished." "Oh, don't worry. Most of my things aren't worth keeping. A lot can be tossed. I sold the good stuff years ago after Tony left when I needed money." "Oh, what happened?" I asked. But Andorra's look told me she would share the details when the children weren't there. After being married to Marjorie for so long, I knew that look well. I knew that Andora's husband had died in a car accident years ago, but I didn't know the full story. Later, as we walked Andorra to her car, I heard a distinct noise behind me. I turned around to see Otterly and Rachel standing there, looking innocent. The girls moved in the next week. Andora's old furniture got mostly tossed, but some pieces ended up in the house. Other things were stored in the back of the garage. Her TV and music system went into the girls' bedroom. The house suddenly felt like a home again. Even my co-workers noticed I seemed happier. They mentioned that I didn't join them for drinks after work as much. But I had 2 daughters to get home to read bedtime stories to every night. My days of traveling had nearly ended when Marge left. Not sure how everything would turn out, I decided to take a stand, and my boss agreed to send some other guys instead of me. I just stopped volunteering to travel whenever I could. It wasn't long after Andorra moved in that I started to develop feelings for her, although I thought I was doing a good job hiding it at the time. What did anyone expect? Andorra was definitely attractive by anyone's standards. She was probably a year younger than me and always looked great, no matter what she wore. Andorra had a wonderful sense of humor and never seemed to get upset, whether it was with the girls or with me. She seemed to overlook my quirks, and I never claimed to be easy to live with. Honestly, I had been taken with Andorra from the moment I first saw her, so it wasn't surprising. I think Carol was the first to notice that I was smitten that Christmas. She and Frank brought their family over for Boxing Day, and Andorra was busy cooking dinner. "Have you told her yet?" Carol asked as we set the table together. "Told who what?" I replied. "Andorra, of course." "Sorry, you've lost me. What am I supposed to tell her?" "That you have feelings for her, silly," Carol said. "Come on, don't be ridiculous, Carol." "Oh, please, Pete, I can see it clearly. You're more into Andorra than you ever were with Stephanie Mathers." I better explain who Stephanie Mathers is. She was my first crush back in school. A friend of Carol's, I admired her for a long time before I finally got the courage to ask her out. She kept me hanging for a bit and then broke my heart when she decided to move on. After that, Stephanie was instantly not welcome with my sister and her friends, who helped me get over her in no time. Of course, I've become fond of Andorra. She's a lovely person, Carol. But I'm in a tricky situation here. Things are working fine as they are. If I do something to shake things up, things could get complicated. Peter, she feels the same way about you. You two act like you're really connected. What are you talking about, Carol? Pete, whenever you go from one side of the room to the other, you both seem to take the long way just to avoid even the slightest interaction. So we just want to respect each other's space. That's not it. There are only 2 reasons why 2 people living together act the way they do. Either they don't get along, which I doubt because I've never heard them argue, or they have feelings for each other. And don't try to deny it. You don't share any lighthearted banter like people often do. That's unusual for 2 people who spend so much time together. Just think about the jokes you share with your colleagues at work. No, both of you seem too concerned about maintaining the friendship. Do you think Andorra likes me? Oh my, Pete, she acts just like you do. The 2 of you are in sync. Even the girls can see it. So what should I do? I'm not sure, Peter. Maybe just express how you feel. Come on. She's not the first person you've impressed with your words. You used to be good at talking to people before you got involved with Marjorie. You never liked Marjorie, did you? No, I never trusted her. I felt like she had you under her influence. It reminds me of how Otterly and Rachel behave now, but I doubt you will notice that. The difference is, those girls truly care for you, which I never thought Marjorie did. Oh, you're wrong, Carol. Marjorie cared about me when we were married. Believe what you want, Pete. You saw care, but I saw someone who benefited from your success. You were doing really well at your job, bringing home a good salary. Frank wasn't earning half of what you were when I married him. I've always thought Marjorie saw you as a stepping stone. No, you must be mistaken, Carol. Whatever you believe, it doesn't matter now. Peter, someone has given you a new chance at happiness. There's a woman in the kitchen who I believe has genuine feelings for you. You just need to find a way to start a conversation. Before we could discuss it more, we heard Andorra coming in to check on the meal preparations, so Carol and I quickly changed the topic. During dinner, Carol kept glancing at me and subtly nodding her head towards Andorra. She also seemed to share a private joke with Otterly and Rachel, but I don't think anyone else noticed. Over the next few days, I almost brought it up with Andorra a couple of times, but I always backed out at the last moment. New Year's Eve arrived and Andorra was busy working. Carol and Frank had taken the girls so I could go to a party with friends from the office. I didn't want to leave the girls, but everyone insisted. This was not a conspiracy. There were just too many unrelated people involved. What happened that night must have just been a coincidence. It was about 4 in the morning and the party was coming to an end. Most people who were going home had already left, and those who stayed had found a place to rest. I couldn't find a good spot to relax, and I had drunk too much to even think about driving home safely. So I decided to call a cab. "Hi, can you send one of your drivers to take me home?" I said to Andorra when she answered the phone at the taxi office. "Are you okay, Pete?" Andorra asked. You could say that. I wasn't sure which phone to use. "I'll send someone over in 5 minutes. Thanks." "Oh, Pete." "Yes?" "Try not to make a mess in the back seat. Have you ever seen me like that? I've never seen you drunk. I really don't know what to expect." "You might be surprised." "I probably would. Phil's on his way, so please don't mess up his car. We already have enough of the guys trying to clean up. Don't worry, I'll be good." "If only you meant that." "What do you mean?" "Never mind. Phil's outside now. Why don't you find your way to his car?" Andorra laughed, and then the call ended. "Wow, Pete, you really had a lot to drink," Phil, the driver, said as he helped me into the back seat of his cab. As he started driving, I noticed he wasn't taking me home. "You're going the wrong way," I tried to say, but it probably came out a bit jumbled. "You'll need someone to help you, and I'm not going to do that. I think I know who will, though. It's pretty quiet now, so one of the guys can handle things for the rest of the night." Honestly, I think I dozed off. The next thing I remember is Phil and Andorra helping me out of the car. I might have pretended to be more helpless than I was, especially when Andorra leaned into me for support as we walked to the door. Phil had to help me up the stairs to my bedroom. Once he left, I relaxed again, and Andorra started to help me make myself comfortable. Sometimes when you're not fully aware, you can end up saying things you wouldn't normally say. It felt like a good chance to take a risk. But maybe the drinks didn't help me pick the right words. Then, out of nowhere, the perfect moment came. Andorra was leaning over me, looking right into my eyes. "You know, you're really something, Andorra," I mumbled. "And what does that mean?" she asked. "That you're amazing, and I want to be near you," I slurred, probably with a silly grin. "Oh, really? Well, I think if you had anything to eat, you wouldn't keep it down. How much have you had to drink tonight?" "Not enough." "Wow, Pete, you're really out of it." "Yeah, but if I'd had a few more, I might actually tell you how much I care about you." A big smile appeared on Andorra's face. "I'll believe it when you say it's sober. Now get some sleep and we'll see how you feel in the morning." "Good night, Peter," she added, standing up to leave the room. "No, don't go," I insisted. "I might be sick and need help." "Okay, where am I supposed to sleep then?" I managed to grab Andorra's arm as she stood, gently pulling her down onto the bed beside me. She didn't try to get up again. We didn't say anything else, and I eventually fell asleep, probably pretty fast considering how much I had to drink. Andorra was right. The bright sunlight coming through the bedroom window didn't help my head at all. I was a bit sad to find that she was no longer there beside me. When I tried to lift my head from the pillow, I quickly realized it wasn't a great idea. I guess I let out a groan. "Here, drink this." I heard Andorra's voice from behind me. "What is it?" I asked, squinting at the sunlight as I turned to look at her. "Well, it's not poison, so no worries there. I just want to make sure you feel better." "What if I turn the tables and try to get rid of you first?" I joked back. If Andorra wanted to be funny, I thought I'd try too. "No, you couldn't do that. You've got 2 daughters to think about. One of them's yours." "That's not how they see it, Peter. They consider themselves sisters and think of you as their dad." "Oh, and you? I think I'm seen as Otterly's mom now. You might have noticed that the Aunt Andorra nickname has been fading. She has called me Mummy several times recently." "Really? I hadn't noticed." "I know, and you didn't react when Rachel started calling you Dad a few weeks ago either." "Oh, I guess I'm not very observant. Has she really been calling me that?" "Daddy, to be exact, Peter. She's been calling you Daddy for about a month now." Even Carol and Frank noticed it. "Did you talk to Carol on Boxing Day?" I asked. "I talked about a lot with her," Peter replied. "That explains it." "What do you mean?" Why, she's already thinking about her wedding outfit, I said, trying to smile, even with my thoughts feeling like a storm. Andorra was sitting there staring at me, still holding the drink she had made for me. "Well?" I asked, after what felt like a long silence. Andorra wore a confused look. I expected her to ask me something, but she didn't. "Well, what?" she responded. "Are you going to marry me or not?" "You haven't asked me yet." "I know. I was trying to see how you felt before I asked. It's better to know before facing rejection." "Well, I don't think you'd look silly if you ask." "But," Andorra said. "But what?" "I have something to tell you before you decide anything." "Oh, should I be worried?" I said. "No, but I am. I'm not a widow, Peter. Tony isn't dead. Actually, I was never legally married to him. I thought I was, but it turns out I wasn't." "I'm a bit confused," I admitted. "Tony was a bigamist. He had another wife when I married him, so my marriage to him isn't real." "Oh, no." "Correct. Tony married 3 of us at different times and ran away during his trial. That's why I told Rachel he was dead. If they find him, he'll be in trouble for a long time. I doubt they'll ever find him anyway." "So you're not a widow, and you were never married?" I asked. "No, technically I'm just someone who has a child without being married. It's easier to say I'm a widow." "Then will you do me the honor?" I didn't get to finish my question, and Andorra didn't get to answer. I wasn't even sure what happened to that drink. But we spent the next hour laughing, enjoying each other's company. My headache faded as we shared light moments together. By the time Frank brought the girls home in the afternoon, everything felt lighter. Andorra and I were sitting in the kitchen making plans and thinking about how to tell the girls our news, but we didn't really need to tell them. The girls seemed to know right away. It might have been because Andorra was almost on my lap when they came bursting in. They stopped suddenly, stared at us for a moment, then gave each other high fives before coming over to hug us. We both felt like we had bright signs above our heads when Frank walked in. He took a quick look at us and said, "Congratulations! When?" Andorra and I understood that as him asking what date we had picked for our wedding. This led to more talking, which included Carol, whom Frank called on the phone. We eventually picked a date, just a random one, in the middle of February. Andorra and I wanted a simple wedding, but our girls wanted something bigger and more exciting. We ended up finding a middle ground. We chose to have the ceremony at the registry office, followed by a nice but small reception since neither of us had many living family members. We picked the registry office because we didn't want to deal with announcements or potential confusion. There were no public notices to worry about, especially since Andorra was supposed to be a widow. After Frank went home, Andorra had to talk to her boss at the cab company about taking time off. There was no way I wanted my wife working late shifts anymore. It was more about my own feelings. I just didn't like the idea of being alone at night. That night, as we got ready for bed, we faced another important choice. In the end, we decided to keep separate bedrooms until after the wedding. We realized it would be hard to explain any choices we made about relationships to our daughters later if they saw us sharing a room now. But that didn't stop me from making a habit of coming home for lunch most days once the girls were back in school. I took some longer breaks, but no one at the office seemed to mind since I was in better spirits. Andorra completed her last shifts at the cab company the next weekend. On Sunday morning, we had to take several taxis to bring home all the flowers and boxes of chocolates, which kept us busy for weeks. Andorra didn't work that Sunday night because some of the drivers and their spouses took us out for dinner and a little celebration at a local pub. Taxis were hard to find in town that night. The wedding came up quickly and went very well. Our girls were wonderful as bridesmaids. I think Andorra and Carol spent more time making them look just right than they did on my bride. But as I've said before, Andorra would look good no matter what she wore. Andorra and I didn't really have a honeymoon. We stayed one night in the fancy hotel where the reception was held, while the girls spent the night with Frank and Carol's children. Our big plan was to take a trip for most of the summer break with the girls. That first year, we explored Florida, the Caribbean, and Southern California for 5 weeks. We moved around a lot, rarely staying in one place for more than a few days to see and experience as much as we could. About a week or two after the wedding, I got home from work one evening and knew something was off. The girls seemed happy, but Andorra seemed restless. After the girls went to bed, she told me what was bothering her. "Rachel knows that Tony isn't dead," she said, when I came down from tucking in the girls and reading them a chapter of their book. "Wow, how did she find out?" I asked, surprised. I thought we had never talked about him when the girls were around. "I don't know, but I've had a feeling something was wrong since we moved here. You know those pictures by the girls' beds? Well, the girls' beds are set up next to each other. There are 3 small cabinets by their sides. The middle one has 2 pictures, one of Andorra and one of me. The others have pictures of Marjorie and Tony. Andorra explained that she had noticed the girls hiding the pictures of Marjorie and Tony in the drawers most nights. Suddenly, I realized I hadn't seen those pictures that evening. Eventually, Andorra asked the girls why they were hiding the pictures. Rachel answered, "They don't want us, so we don't want to see their pictures." After talking more, Andorra found out that Rachel understood her father wasn't dead from an accident, but had left. However, she didn't seem to know why. Andorra, feeling embarrassed, decided to keep some details from Rachel. She didn't want to explain to her that she was technically born out of wedlock. While Andorra worried about how Rachel would feel knowing her father was out there, the child didn't seem to care at all. I believed that sharing information helped the girls feel closer to each other. Andorra was a fantastic wife and an amazing mother to our girls. She was wonderful with the kids and very patient with me, especially when work became stressful. Even though I have my flaws, Andorra never brought them up, which I appreciated. She had a great sense of humor and always found fun ways to lighten the mood in the evenings, especially after the kids were asleep. Some nights were quite tiring for us. By the start of summer, Marjorie's calls to Otterly had almost stopped. I wasn't surprised, since Otterly had changed her approach and was more outspoken when Marjorie did call. I knew Otterly felt upset with her mother, but both Andorra and I had to step in when Otterly referred to Andorra as her new mummy during those conversations. After that, Otterly started talking about how enjoyable our family outings were, mentioning Daddy's wife and my sister Rachel frequently. Andorra and I discussed how Otterly interacted with Marjorie on phone calls several times. In the end, we realized we could not create a long list of words Otterly should avoid. She would surely come up with new terms on her own with Rachel's help. We decided that Marjorie had brought this on herself, and she would have to deal with it. Not long after our holiday, Otterly and Rachel began again with the mummy and daddy questions. For a while, Andorra and I struggled to understand what they meant, but eventually we figured out they were asking if we were truly their parents, and I partly blamed the internet. Suddenly, we started finding printouts about adoption procedures around the house. It seemed like they wanted Andorra to adopt Otterly and me to adopt Rachel. The girls even researched the process of changing Rachel's name to Thomas and had printed out the needed forms. After discussing the adoption idea, Andorra and I agreed that we would either adopt both girls or none of them. Rachel's father, even though he had left, still had legal rights over her. Eventually, we decided to seek help from the same lawyer who handled my divorce. It took more than a year, but we finally succeeded in having Tony's parental rights removed, and both adoptions were completed. By chance, or because of our lawyer, the same judge who handled my divorce also decided on Tony's parental rights. I think this might have influenced his choice. Legally, our family now included Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, along with our daughters, Otterly and Rachel. We talked about having more children, but decided against it for now. Not long after we married, I got a promotion at work, which meant a better salary and less stress. Our summer trips became a cherished tradition. I believe Andorra planned these trips to make up for my missed adventures when I was younger. In our second year of marriage, we spent 5 weeks traveling through Europe. The third year, we explored India and Sri Lanka. In the fourth, we went to Australia and New Zealand, though we mistakenly went in the middle of their winter. Being British, we were used to the change. By our 5th summer, we were experienced travelers. Otterly and Rachel, both 14 by then, had their own video cameras and were getting good at recording our adventures. That year, our plans included Canada, the northern USA, and Alaska. My 3 girls spent the winter and spring planning the trip. I mostly let them handle it, only suggesting a few interesting places I had heard about long ago, knowing we would visit them during our travels. One thing we didn't consider was the Christmas cards from Marjorie. About 2 years after our wedding, both Andorra and I started receiving cards from her. Otterly had always received cards for Christmas and her birthday, but we were puzzled about why Marjorie was sending them to us now. We couldn't reply because none came with a return address. What I didn't notice at first was that all the cards had Canadian stamps. This might lead someone to think Marjorie and Ronald had moved to Canada. Sadly, Marjorie wasn't mentioned much in our home anymore, and she hadn't called Otterly in years, so it wasn't something we discussed. As always, the plan for our summer vacation changed over time. The girls told me it wasn't possible to visit every place on our list, even after we cut it down quite a bit. In the end, we decided to draw a line across the continent, similar to what we had done a few years earlier. That summer, we decided to visit the West, leaving the East for another time. We flew into Winnipeg on an Air Canada flight in late June. After spending a day or two exploring some historic sites near the city, nothing too detailed since this isn't a travel guide, we started our journey in a rental car. We traveled west from Manitoba into Saskatchewan, then turned south, making our way through the Dakotas and Nebraska, all the way down to Kansas. After that, we headed west and then north again, passing through Colorado and Wyoming, where we spent a few days at what I think is called a dude ranch. The horses were nice to ride, but I think I'll stick to English saddles from now on. While the Western saddles were comfortable, I felt like it might be harder to get off if anything went wrong. Not that I thought it would happen, but it crossed my mind. Riding neck reining was also a new experience for me. There are two ideas about riding horses or motorcycles when things become tricky. One is to stay on and hope you can regain control. The other is to jump off and hope to land on your feet. I never liked the idea of being on a large horse or a bike with its engine roaring and wheels spinning, ending up in a risky situation. Anyway, I got a bit off track. Eventually, we arrived in Montana and stopped at a town I had always wanted to visit. I had probably read about it in a Western novel or something similar. After we checked into our hotel or motel, whatever you want to call it, we went to a diner nearby. The diner was busy and noisy with people chatting away. Then suddenly there was a loud crash that made everyone stop talking. It turned out that a waitress had dropped a tray full of someone's meals. In moments like that, it's only natural to look around and see who made the noise. Andorra and I found ourselves doing just that, curious about the clumsy person who startled everyone. It wasn't very considerate of them to cause such a scene, especially since they were probably feeling quite embarrassed already. I quickly spotted the person responsible and was surprised to realize I recognized her. It seemed she recognized me, too. Her wide eyes made that clear. Looking back, I realized that her surprise might have caused her to drop the tray in the first place. From Andorra's reaction, it was clear she knew the woman as well. Andorra and I reacted almost the same way when we spoke to our daughters. "Eat your dinner, Rachel Otterly." "It's nothing for you to worry about," Andorra said to Rachel, and I said the same to Otterly. Even after 5 years, it was still hard to break old habits. Though we were now a blended family, both legally adopted, there was a natural urge to correct our own kids first. It didn't matter much, though. Both girls turned in their seats to see what had caused the disturbance. Otterly quickly faced forward again when she recognized the waitress. I think she quietly said, "Serves her right," before returning to her meal like nothing had happened. Rachel kept watching until the waitress hurried away. Then Rachel gave me a sweet smile, looked at her mother, and went back to eating, just like Otterly. The waitress leaving had caught the attention of some other diners who seemed to notice what had happened. Maybe some had looked our way before, but I didn't notice. It was clear that people understood we were connected to the situation. As a family, we tried to ignore the stares and focused on finishing our dinner. "It seems like things weren't as perfect as they seemed," Andorra whispered as we followed the girls to the car. "What do you mean?" I asked, maybe a little sharper than I wanted. She must not be with Ronald anymore if she's working here. "Maybe one of them was unfaithful. They say once it happens again. But she didn't do that to you. She just left you and Otterly. You can't really believe they didn't have some sort of relationship before the divorce. Plus, walking out on your daughter feels like a deep disappointment. Either she couldn't keep her distance or he couldn't be faithful. Does it really matter? Not really, as long as she doesn't try to make trouble now. Otterly is already confused. She doesn't need more stress." "It's too late for any of that, Pete. Besides, I think Otterly handled it better than you did." After all, it was the girls who— Don't say it, Andorra. I know what the girls did, and I'm glad they're clever. But sometimes I do wonder how much they planned. What do you mean by that? Oh, it's nothing much. It just felt like they had a plan. Sometimes I wonder how early they planned this. Honestly, I'm really happy with how things turned out. I just get curious sometimes. By the time we reached the car, I used the remote to unlock the doors. The kids jumped into the back seat. I opened the front passenger door for Andorra. Instead of getting in, she stepped closer to me and embraced me warmly. The kids cheered from the back, calling out things like, "Not in public," and "Can't you wait until later?" Some might think it was a bit amusing for two 14-year-olds to say such things. But our daughters were wise beyond their years. Andorra had to grow up quickly after losing her husband when Rachel was just 6. Otterly faced her own challenges when her mother left us, which I didn't handle well, but with Rachel's support, she became much more mature than most kids her age. Suddenly, Andorra pulled back and whispered, "We have an audience," glancing over my shoulder. I turned and saw Marjorie standing in what looked like the kitchen doorway watching us. "Do you think Otterly should—" Andorra suggested. "Yes, I think we have to," I replied. I realized I would have to talk to Marjorie later, and it would involve setting up a private visit for Otterly. This was a good chance to clear things up. "Otterly," Andorra said, leaning into the car while I was still thinking. "Your mother is over there. You should go see her." "Do I have to?" Otterly asked. "She is your mother," Andorra said gently. "Please, you might regret it later if you don't go." With a sigh, Otterly climbed out of the car, looking back at us a few times. She walked toward her mother, but stopped about 10 feet away. Marjorie seemed to say something to her, but we couldn't hear it. When Marjorie took a step closer, Otterly quickly took a step back. It was a bit frustrating not being able to hear their conversation, but I didn't think Otterly would say much anyway. We noticed that whenever Marjorie moved towards Otterly, she backed away. "This isn't good," Andorra quietly said, probably so Rachel wouldn't hear. Almost immediately, Otterly turned and rushed back to the car. Without a word, she jumped into her seat, slammed the door shut, and began to buckle her seatbelt. When I looked back where Marjorie had stood, it was empty, so I figured she had gone inside. I would have rather gotten in the car and left, but Andorra had other plans. She was halfway to the door before Otterly even had her seatbelt fastened. So I stood there for 10 minutes until Andorra came back. When she finally got in the car, I gave her a confused look. She returned it with one that seemed to say, "Don't ask now, just drive. We'll talk later." That afternoon, our plan was to hike along a path by the river and see the waterfall the town was named after. We sensed that maybe the hydroelectric plant had taken away some of its original beauty, but it was still impressive. As usual, we took it easy on the hike, and the two girls moved ahead of us, giving Andorra and me a chance to talk. "So what did she say?" I asked. "He left her 2 years ago for a waitress in town," Andorra replied. "Just like we thought. But why hasn't she gone back to the UK? "He left her with a motel bill. The motel needed help in the restaurant, so she decided to stay and work it off. She shares a room with another woman. They both work in the restaurant during the day and at a bar across the street at night." "Sounds exciting. What else does she have to do, Pete?" "Maybe she finds some comfort in the company around her," I added. "There's no need to be mean, Peter. Marjorie made a mistake, and now she seems to be dealing with the consequences. Anyway, you're meeting her after her shift at 6. She only has a couple of hours before she has to work at the bar, so you can talk while I take the kids for dinner." "Andorra, what am I supposed to say to her?" "You need some closure, Peter. Whatever you think. You need to sit down and talk to her. And remember, she is Otterly's mother." It's a shame she didn't think about that sooner. Those were Marjorie's words, Peter. She regrets what happened and wants to apologize to both Otterly and you. But I don't think Otterly is ready to hear that apology yet. That was clear from what happened at lunch. But over time, I'm sure she will. We just need to make sure we don't lose track of her again. You seem really positive about all this, especially after what Tony did to you. Pete, what's the point of living with hate all the time? What Tony did to me was really bad, maybe even worse than what Marjorie did to you and Otterly. For a while I felt angry at him and the other women he tricked into marrying him. But one day we were all waiting together at the police station. and I realized we were all in the same situation. We had all been fooled, and it wasn't our fault, so we became friends. And Tony, what's the use in wasting time being angry at him? If he ever shows up, I'll tell the police immediately. But I'm not going to waste my feelings on hating him. I have more important people to care about. Andorra hugged me warmly. Besides, if Marjorie hadn't left with that guy, where would we be now? Good point, Andorra. I know it is, my love. We should get going then. It's already past 4. I was waiting in the restaurant parking lot when Marjorie finished her shift. She came out with another woman who had dark hair. The woman looked at me carefully before going on her way. Marjorie seemed nervous, not at all like the confident person I remembered from the kitchen years ago. Still, she looked pretty good. Hi, Peter, thanks for coming. The bar should be quiet now. Shall we go over there and talk? I didn't say anything, but motioned for her to lead the way. I followed Marjorie to a booth at the back of the bar. It was clear we were expected. I had noticed the dark-haired woman sitting at the bar talking to the bartender when we entered. All the booths near ours were empty. The dark-haired woman followed us over and placed 2 beers on the table. She said something to Marjorie in what sounded like Spanish. Marjorie just nodded, so I guessed she had learned the language during her travels. You wanted to meet me, Marjorie, I reminded her, since I hadn't asked for this meeting. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Peter, she finally whispered. I barely heard her. I'm not. You did me a huge favor, I replied. I'm not really the kind of person who deals with these situations well. Yeah, Andorra got the better part of the deal. I should have known she'd get close to you right after I left, Marjorie said bitterly. It was the other way around, Marjorie. Once I saw Andorra... I wasn't quite sure how to finish that sentence. Maybe I thought if I had met Andorra before Marjorie left, it might have been me who walked away. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I doubt I would have acted that way. I'm the type of person who cares too much about doing the right thing to be selfish. Sometimes I wonder if that's a flaw. What happened to your guy, anyway? I asked Marjorie. And where did he get all that money? I heard he left his family with nothing, and now his wife has taken all his bank accounts. Ronald's money? That's a joke. You mean everyone else's money? He's a con artist, Peter. He's wanted in many places. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why he left me. I helped him with some of his schemes, and we had to leave Argentina quickly when my picture showed up in the local news. I think he crossed into Canada when he heard the FBI was looking for him at the motel here. Ironically, he was spotted with one of the waitresses from the diner. Now I'm stuck working shifts like one of them. Weren't the FBI looking for you too? Well, yes, but not really. I made a deal with them. If I agree to testify against Ronald when they catch him, they won't come down hard on me. Basically, I got 2 years of probation for helping a fugitive escape. I have to stay in the country until they catch him, and I have to check in with the authorities every week. Thankfully, Buster, the deputy I report to, is usually around the diner. Are you still in debt? Yes, I was drowning in it. I signed for almost everything, including the rental car Ronald and his accomplice took off in. I've almost paid it all off, but I still owe a couple of $1,000s. No, Pete, I can't. Marjorie had seen me reaching for my checkbook. For once, listen to me, Marjorie. I'll write you a check for $5,000. That's nearly $10,000, which should settle your debts and give you a little extra. If you ever decide to go back to the UK when they finally catch him, we'll help you find a place and settle in. But don't think this means you can disrupt our family. And just so you know, the courts have taken away your parental rights regarding Otterly. She made that clear to me this morning. I'm sorry to hear that. That wasn't our intention. I understand when Andorra came into the kitchen. Pete, I was foolish. I never meant to hurt you and Otterly. I got caught up in Ronald's stories. Trust me, it wasn't as exciting as it sounded. Marjorie, that was a long time ago. Honestly, I'm just glad you're safe and doing well. Otterly and I have started a new chapter in our lives, and I'm sorry, but you're not part of it anymore. However, Andorra and I will make sure that Otterly stays connected with you. I really don't deserve this, Peter, or the money you gave me. You should take it. It will help me feel better when we leave tomorrow. We'll stop by the diner for breakfast in the morning, and maybe we can get Otterly to talk to you nicely. I don't deserve your kindness, Peter. No, you don't, Marjorie. I had to be honest, even if I wanted to hold back. But you are Otterly's mother, and that's something I can't change. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to return to my family. Of course, I'm sorry, Pete. I got up and walked away without looking back. When I finally found the girls, it felt like everyone had been holding their breath for me. I took Andorra aside and quickly shared what I discussed with Marjorie, including the money I had given her. "She doesn't appreciate you," was Andorra's reaction when I mentioned the check. "She said something similar," I replied, giving my wife an affectionate look. "But you truly deserve it." "Thank you," she said softly in response. Later, I talked to Otterly alone and was about to start on the "you have only one birth mother" speech when she told me that Andorra and Rachel had already spoken with her. From that point on, the conversation changed. Otterly said she would be willing to talk to her mother the next morning and promised to keep her tone civil. However, she insisted that Rachel or I had to be there with her. When I asked why, she simply said that one of us had always been there during good times. I wasn't sure what to make of that, but chose to let it go. The next morning, Marjorie, Otterly, and Rachel talked at a nearby table for a long time. I think Marjorie's friends were helping her because she was supposed to be working. Andorra and I could only hear bits of their conversation about how well the garden was doing back at home. Despite everything, they all had smiles most of the time. As we left, Marjorie walked to the car with us and said goodbye to both girls. Then she turned to Andorra and me. "Those two are so lucky. They have the best parents in the world," she said, surprising me a bit, then hurried back inside the restaurant. I think she started showing her emotions as she ran. I hugged my wife, then we got in the car and drove north toward the border in Calgary. From what I saw in the rearview mirror, I don't think either of the children looked back or seemed too bothered that we were leaving that town behind. Life continues. Epilogue. After we got home that year, Marjorie kept in touch. Andorra began writing to her quite often, I believe. We never found out if Ronald was ever located by the FBI. But we heard less than a year later that Marjorie was going to marry her deputy sheriff or something like that. We held a family meeting, and after some deep thoughts, we decided to decline the invitation to Marjorie's wedding. However, I ended up going on my own for a few days to attend. I can't explain why, but it felt important for me to go. Buster, or Buddy as everyone called him, turned out to be a really nice guy once I got to know him. He even picked me up from the airport and introduced me to his friends and family. I learned from Buddy that Marjorie had been completely honest with him from the start. She told him everything about her past choices and how much she regretted them. It turned out Buddy had arranged for some of his truck driving friends to send her Christmas cards to us from different towns in Canada. I think Marjorie was trying to navigate her situation in a way that would protect us. It felt a bit strange to support my ex-wife at her wedding, but someone had to do it. Maybe that's why I went. It helped me find a sense of closure. I don't think Otterly and Rachel figured out where I went for those 5 days, but they might have. They were always one step ahead of me on almost everything, and honestly, they still are. Over the next few years, we heard that Marjorie had 2 boys. Although we've only seen them in pictures now that they are a bit older, I believe they keep in touch with Otterly and Rachel regularly. However, neither of my daughters mentions Marjorie or her sons to me very often. Eventually, Otterly and Rachel both married 2 brothers. Sometimes I feel sorry for those poor guys. The girls are still very close and definitely lead in their marriages. When they start planning together, it takes a special kind of man to stand his ground. I don't think I ever could. Each of them has 2 children and, interestingly, both times they had their babies around the same time. Andorra and I have loved watching our grandchildren grow up just like their mothers did. I retired last year as the director of my company, and now Andorra and I are enjoying an 8-month cruise around the world. We were hoping to find a nice place to settle down, but honestly, I think our daughters and their families will bring us back home to the UK. We didn't sell our house. Our daughters insisted we keep it because of the roses. They spend a lot of time taking care of the garden, and we get regular updates. Just this morning, I was checking my email and saw a picture of my garden from them titled, "It's been a good year for the roses. Life goes on."